Okay, I think because we've only got a short session today, I'll kick things off. So, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everyone to Rosterfy's very first webinar of our Aotearoa New Zealand Lunch and Learn series in partnership with Volunteering New Zealand. With this series, we intend to support you all with the amazing mahi you already do by inviting along some thought leaders in the volunteering space to have insightful kōrero over your lunch break. So I am so super excited today to be joined by Marian Casey. So a little bit about Marian. She has 30 years of volunteer leadership experience in events and emergency services and is the Deputy Commissioner of Volunteering for St John Ambulance, New South Wales. On top of that, she was the Central Sydney Volunteer of the Year for 2022, Western Sydney Woman Volunteer of the Year and Woman of the Year 2023, bit of a mouthful there, and was awarded a National Emergency Medal for the 2019 to 2020 bushfires. And we were lucky enough to actually have Marian join our team just last November. So welcome, Marian. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here and excited to chat to everyone today.
Amazing. So a bit of an agenda for today's kōrero. We are covering how you can build an impactful induction program for your volunteers. So with Marian's insights on both being a volunteer herself as well as a volunteer manager, we'll be covering some of the key barriers to creating a good induction experience, what the most important things to include in an induction are, and then Marian is going to share some of her real life examples of where she's created some impactful inductions. Quick bit of housekeeping. Any questions you may have, please drop them in the chat and we can answer them as we go, but we will also have a Q&A session at the end for any other burning questions, and I've actually already had a couple via email to ask as well, which is fantastic. Just quickly before we kick things off, for those of you who aren't aware of Rosterfy, we've been around for over 8 years now, and we're used by over 3 million volunteers and staff worldwide. We've recently ticked over 100 million hours of volunteering powered by Rosterfy across 35 different countries. And here's a quick sample of some of the customers that we work with worldwide, supporting them with their volunteer experience end to end, from the recruitment and induction phase through to scheduling and training, and then right on to reporting and rewards and recognition. And our team lives and breathes volunteering. So I myself have previously worked in the volunteering and fundraising departments for a Kiwi NFP, and I also volunteered for 4 years at Lifeline Aotearoa. And our team are consistently in our communities getting involved in causes that are important to them, to learn about both volunteers and clients' experiences to always help improve our product. So now that that's all out of the way, let's kick things off with the first question. So Marian, did you want to give us an overview of your volunteer induction experience and some of the barriers that you've seen?
Thanks. Yeah, as you said, I've been a volunteer for a very long time, for over 30 years, for many different organisations. The longest one is for 15 years with St John Ambulance, New South Wales. So in my spare time, I look after 3,500 volunteers across our state, looking at, everything that they do, from budgets to looking at strategy to looking at induction. And it's such an amazing organisation, and I love working especially with cadets and younger volunteers. But I've been a volunteer for so many different places, and currently also volunteer for State Emergency Service in a local unit, and then also with the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons, teaching surgeons about communication and teamwork. But more than anything, I've been through so many inductions, both the good, the bad, and everything in between. So I think it's really interesting to see what's happened in this space and how it's changed over time. In particular, the biggest ones where I've seen the biggest barriers are the ones where I've disengaged or I haven't continued on, where I've put an EOI in and either heard nothing, or they've had some communication about what the induction process is like, and it just doesn't fit into my schedule, or there's no flexibility around it. In particular, it was very different from when I was a uni student to now being a full-time worker. Your commitment level is totally different. So, having that sort of availability is really hard. A really good example was an organization that I volunteered for. They said, you've got to come for a welcome night to find out if you're the right fit and have an interview. And then you have to do 3 continuous nights. And this was 6 months after I had done an EOI. And of the 3 nights, one of them was my sister's birthday. And I said, I can't come for that night. And they said, oh, well, you have to wait. You can do the night 1 and 3 and then come back for night 2. And I had to wait another 3 months for that. And unfortunately, it was actually on first aid. So it would have been really good to have an opportunity to find out what even that night was about, or was there another way I could have completed that wasn't that traditional face-to-face in a classroom. I think in particular, what my day-to-day work over the last 15 years as well has been working in the university sector and seeing how much that has changed as well. And I think inductions are the same, where it's not necessarily always about being in a classroom using a PowerPoint presentation and having that traditional didactic learning. I think sometimes when you put people into a room and talk to them, or talk at them, I should say, that disengagement can happen quite quickly. So it's, that's something that's really interesting to see from like what people are changing and doing in inductions. In terms of like governance, I understand that a lot of organizations have a lot of governance in terms of what's required for a volunteer to be onboarded, to understand what their role is, to understand the risks and the rewards of their volunteering role. But often, sometimes they can get bogged down on too many tasks and too many things that they need to complete before they can go out there and start volunteering, which is what they've turned up to do. So it's interesting to see that there are so many barriers sometimes that people then don't understand the why and the how and the what, and what is their journey to actually get there to become a volunteer.
Yeah, and I think from what you were just saying about being bogged down by things like compliance or tasks, I remember having this experience myself as a volunteer where I knew that I had to go through all of the things that I had to go through because I had, it was important, but it was all sitting in my emails somewhere and I couldn't keep track of it all. And that's what made me feel overwhelmed, is this just, I wanted to do it all correctly, but I just didn't know where to find everything, which is what I think, if I think that's, systems like Rosterfy do really well, where it's all in what, the tasks are all in one and actually one system. So you know where you can find them and you can go, okay, step by step, here's where I'm at, rather than trying to find everything sitting all in your emails or paper that they've given you and you lose pieces of paper and you're just like, it's too hard. So that's definitely an experience I've had with that as well.
Yeah, and having, even just if from a systems point of view, if there's like lots of different systems, if there's 5 different websites you need to go to do different aspects, and if there's no sort of handbook or one pager or checklist. I love a good checklist of knowing where you're up to is sometimes where people get lost. And if it becomes too hard, or if it becomes, well, I'll just do that later, that's where you're going to have the drop-offs.
Absolutely. Just centralizing everything for volunteers and making it as simple as possible, even if there is a lot to do, is just the most helpful. Okay, so putting your volunteer hat on, what are some of the things that you would want in an induction as a volunteer?
Flexibility would have to be the number one thing more than anything else. As a full-time worker, someone who volunteers already, if I was going into and to volunteer for another organization, whether it be a one-off event or continuous volunteering, I want it to be flexible to work with my other commitments. So, for me at the moment, a weekend is easier, but if I can do some e-learning in my spare time, or if I can do some small tasks when I get an opportunity, on a lunch break or before work. Like those are the big things that make it easier for me to feel like I'm progressing and feeling like I'm getting to my goal or my point of being able to go out and volunteer.
Yeah.
I think the other part is like feeling that sense of community really early and feeling part of a team.
Absolutely.
I think that's
Yeah.
the main reason why I go volunteer, is because I want to feel like I'm part of something bigger, that
Yeah.
I am meeting new people. Like one of my biggest motivators to volunteer is to make new friends and
Yeah.
to have that social side outside of all the other things that I do. So, having icebreakers, having fun activities, having a team building exercise really gives you that sense of you're there together and having a bit of fun.
Yeah.
One thing that I found really good as well is having like a chat that you can have. So like that feeling of one organization I'm with, you have that feeling that you're part of a cohort.
Yeah.
So that's got the Warrior Women Foundation, and we have a really active WhatsApp chat where you can share ideas, if you have questions, if you're lost, if you can't find the link for the meeting that night, someone's there to support you and help you, and that really, makes you feel like you're part of that community as well. So having that sort of like online chat function is really good.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing for me as someone who's experienced as a volunteer and I'm walking through the door of an organization, I want a sense of like either recognition of prior learning or given opportunities where I could be, given not have to do every aspect of the induction. I know that's
Yeah.
not always possible depending on how many people you have, but if there are opportunities that there is a consideration on, here are some opportunities where you might not have to complete different aspects, or, understanding what are the components that are necessary for my role, not always necessary for anyone who comes and volunteers, and making sure it's bespoke for the role that
Yeah.
I'm going to do.
Absolutely. You're having those bespoke journeys depending on the role you're doing. And yeah, I think the recognition of prior learning is a big one as well. I'm just in the process at the moment of trying to volunteer for Lifeline in Australia as well, and getting that recognition of prior learning from my New Zealand time as well has been really helpful, and definitely made some of the experience of it easier too.
Yeah. And I totally understand that there is a lot of governance that you have to
Yeah,
do with most
absolutely.
organizations, with criminal record checks, working with children checks, and even just like from a safety point of view and risk management, does someone understand who they need to report to, how to manage situations that they might not have been exposed to before. And that's
Yeah,
really important to document that and have, but you have to have the why as well. Why do I need to know this? Why is this important for my volunteering and my role? And sometimes I think that gets lost a little in inductions, in terms of giving those brand new people that context and that information that for a volunteer manager, they know day to day, they know all the time,
yeah.
is part of their normal lexicon and experience. But as a brand new volunteer to an organization, I don't know all that information.
Absolutely. That's such a good point, because you do feel like a bit overloaded sometimes with all the things you have to do. But if you're understanding why they're all important to an organization and how they also protect you as a volunteer and also the other volunteers that you're volunteering with, and when you're coming together, that context makes things just so much, I suppose, easier for you. Absolutely. Okay, and what experiences have you had building inductions, and what do you believe has made them successful?
I've had so much experience over the last 15 years building inductions, everything from, working for a very small volunteer organization, just doing a face to face half day sessions with a laptop and a projector, to building extensive online e-learning and different modes for the same induction. So I think that like my real initial experience was in the university sector, where we had students who would come and volunteer in the lab that I was working in. And, we put an EOI process out. We were inundated with students who were keen to come and help us out, learn more, have more experiences outside of the classroom. And I had to figure out how were we going to ensure that we inducted them, that we gave
Mm-hmm.
them the same experience. They weren't all available at the same time to come and have an induction. So I had to really ensure that there was consistency, repeatability, that I had a good checklist, that I actually got them to check off things as we went through, walking around, showing them what to do, where everything was, and being making sure that I could file that and keep consistency in the like documentation as well. So being able to hand that over to someone else in the future. Um, but during the university sector, like while working in the university sector, I've realized that I wanted to keep upskilling myself, and I decided in 2020 to start learning about e-learning and how to do a lot of online tools, because that was a
Yeah.
big area for growth in the university sector. So I started going on LinkedIn Learning and YouTube, and had some really great experiences in some working for other organizations to then keep growing my knowledge and opportunities to learn from others as well about what makes a good induction. So I then went to St John, New South Wales, who I was already volunteering for, and did some part-time work overhauling their induction across the state. We did a lot of focus groups, a lot of learning from what other states were doing. So I went down to Melbourne and observed St John, Victoria, what their induction was like,
Mm-hmm.
and took some really good notes, took some really good key takeaways about some games that they played and how maybe that could be applicable in New South Wales.
Yeah.
But in particular, what I learned was about that sort of mixed mode, or how to develop an induction for different audiences. So in New South Wales, we decided to do an online e-learning, which was just e-learning modules that we could actually do for both staff, volunteers, and then also different volunteer roles.
Yeah.
And then we did a face-to-face one day that we rolled out mostly across the Metro Sydney area. And then
Mm-hmm.
we looked as well at what were the needs of a cadet versus an adult. And we created a big, extensive library of resources for cadets that included looking at how the person who's at the local division, community group, unit could bespoke those resources depending on
Mm-hmm.
the age group that they had, because we knew that every group was different, every age group had different needs, and then we wanted to make sure that someone could put their personal stamp on it as well, so we wanted to give them more than they actually needed. From there, I went to State Emergency Service, and I worked for them for a year as a change manager as part of a program that was looking at many different training resources, and one of them was looking at the induction. And again, similar situation, where looking at people who are in regional areas, how can we give them resources? Is it e-learning? Is it face-to-face? And we started creating those resources, but found actually having an offline workbook as a third option for people who were fly in, fly out, or shift
Yeah.
workers, or maybe don't have a computer at home and are also wanting to ensure that they can get the same opportunities, and don't have time to sit in a classroom, that you could give them a workbook that they could take home, fill it out,
Mm-hmm.
and then bring it back with. We even had like boxes of like, do you have any questions about this section, that you can take to when you get back to the unit. So it gave them a lot of calls to action on
Yeah.
how to come back to the unit when they had completed their workbook, or got it to a point where they felt they wanted to keep talking to someone through it. Um,
Yeah.
but I think my biggest observation in that environment was actually the thought about gamification. And we
Yeah.
created a game at the end of e-learning, and many people actually just wanted to try it, even though they weren't going through induction, which was really funny, but really cool at the same time. And it was more about, at the end of your induction, what do you want your volunteer to remember? How can you pull all the different aspects that you've covered in a one day induction, or through lots of e-learning modules, and make them feel that they really understand what their role is and what they're required to do. So
Yeah.
having like a scenario or something that they can walk through to really go, oh, now I get it. Now it all makes sense.
Yeah,
Is something that I think is really important to do.
really clever. And so, final question I have before we head into the Q&A. What advice would you give someone wanting to build or review their induction? Which I feel like you've already given a lot of advice, but if we kind of narrow it down, top few
Yeah,
things.
I think the first thing is, if you're going to review your own induction or build one from scratch, is, lots of people do it really well, and there's lots of really great ideas out there. So go and watch what someone else does, or go and learn from someone else. Go ask lots of questions, because there's lots of people like myself out there who can help support you and find out what has worked for them. What lessons learnt do they have that you can take to your organization?
And
I
I'm
think the other
thinking
side
probably
is from,
volunteer based as well, right? Like if someone like you was
yeah,
volunteering, an organization actually asked you, hey, what did you like about our induction? What would you have liked to see? Like your volunteer base are an amazing way of getting that information of where else have you volunteered and what's worked better and how can we improve in that way. Awesome knowledge base.
exactly. Yeah. And that's the big thing, is just asking for help is always the hard thing to do. And I think the
Mm,
more you ask questions and have that curiosity of how could things be better,
yeah,
what could the future look like, that's going to be a big driver to make your induction better.
absolutely.
I think the other aspect is, from a tech point of view, if that's something that you haven't looked into for your organization, what are some simple wins that you can have? Is it short videos? Is it looking at, YouTube and platforms like LinkedIn Learning, where there are lots of really short modules where you could learn over time different aspects to then improve your induction program? Uh,
Mhm.
there's lots of expensive software out there for learning management systems, but there's lots of simple wins that you can have if you're just starting out, to really keep building and keep growing your resources for induction.
Mhm.
I think the last thing is thinking about, journey mapping. And that's something that I think Rosterfy does really well, is
Yeah,
that, how do you signal to a volunteer, as you stated before, that they don't get lost, that they know where they are and know what they're up to and they know what's next? Because
yeah,
when they have a really defined checklist,
yeah.
and map, that's going to really drive them to keep going forward and keep them motivated, so that they can complete all the tasks in order to get out and start volunteering.
Yeah. And I think on the other side of that journey mapping is when you use a system like Rosterfy that really handholds volunteers through every single step. On the other side, for your volunteering managers or other people who are, in charge of taking the volunteers to that induction, they've got a super nice overview as to where everybody is. Because I know from myself from working in a volunteering department, it's so easy just to get like lose volunteers in the process and they just fall through
Mm-hmm.
because you're managing so many through an induction and this percentage have done everything, but then this percentage is stuck here. And it's just people everywhere and keeping it all quite centralized and having that really solid overview is okay, here's where I'm at. Everyone's kind of moving themselves through nicely, apart from this portion that I can get involved with and help bring them through as well. That's just so powerful and it just improves the volunteer experience so much as well.
Agreed. And it's just one of those things that you really want to do well, because you don't want that drop off, because it is, for every 10 volunteers that I had walk through my door, when I was a volunteer manager of a local group, um, 1 out of 10 would make it till the end of the year. And that's a lot of work for someone who's volunteering, to try and engage with those people. So,
Yeah,
and you think about, if you didn't have that drop off, what could you be doing instead? What sort of things could you be?
the return of investment from your volunteers, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
actually momentum you could gain. And I think you've got that person putting their hand up to say, I want to volunteer with you, I'm interested. And the only reason they're dropping off really is because they maybe haven't had the experience or other reasons, but a big reason might be that they haven't had the experience that they were hoping for, or they've lost momentum along the way. So yeah, keeping it as the journey and the experience as seamless and as engaging and as possible is so key here. Amazing. Okay, thanks, Marian. Let's move on to our Q&A. I'm not sure if have we had any questions. I think we have dropped in the chat. I made that message from organisers. Oh, here we go. We've got one from Margaret. How can organisations ensure that new volunteers understand the vetting process? Is it overdone? May not be required for all roles. And does Australia have universal vetting so a volunteer can use that for many organisations? Big question there.
Ooh, so there is obviously in Australia we have Working with Children checks, which is a national
Mhm.
accreditation. I think that's the right
Yeah.
word, but governance that's
Yep.
done nationally, and that's done every 5 years. Some organisations do it more often. And then we've got the criminal record check that can be done through many different platforms and organisations. I know there's a few that we use in Rosterfy that are integrated into our system, and that is dependent on the organisation choosing which one they want to do.
Yeah.
There are other aspects that often, in terms of ensuring that vetting, and a lot of organizations use interviews and references, and that can be
Mhm.
phone based, face to face, or written. And I think it's just dependent on resources and availability and how
Yeah.
many people you're getting through the pipeline, and knocking on your door, because I'm sure everyone would love to interview everyone, but that's not
Mhm.
always possible to do that. So having sometimes a questionnaire just to begin with of like, hey, what are you interested in? What would you like
Yeah.
to do? One of my biggest questions in St John was, do you like working with people? And what do you think about what's been your experience with treating wounds? Because I would often sometimes have people saying, actually, I don't like the sight of blood and I don't like working with people. And I'm like, okay, good. That's good to know straight away. So let's find you something else to do in volunteering that might not be that face-to-face out at events. Let's find you something, that could be in logistics or in communications or in
Mhm.
our operating the radio network, because we still want to have them in our organization. We just want to make sure that they've got the role that they need and want to do that's going to suit what they like to do.
Yeah, and I think going back to the journey mapping we were talking about in Rosterfy, so I know that we have that tool that when you're setting up different roles for induction, we can really map exactly what requirements are needed for each role. So what we're not doing is putting through everybody through the same sort of governance or compliance, and in that way overdoing it when certain steps aren't necessary. But in the same way, if that volunteer that's volunteered for one role decides to go, actually, I'd like to volunteer here too, it will flag what they haven't already got that they need for that role. And that's really helpful, because I think what Margaret's saying here as well about things being overdone or not being required for all roles, sometimes if you don't have the tech or the support in that way to really help to map based on role, that's where the overdone sort of process can kind of come in, because you're just working to one type of volunteer. We have had another question come through via email. I'll just read it out here from Jessica, who couldn't make it, but will be tuning into the webinar when it's made as a on-demand session. So this is about special considerations for induction when your new volunteers aren't the usual demographic of your existing cohort. So she says, I manage 2 volunteer teams, and in both contexts, I have established older Pakeha volunteers, but younger graduates or migrants are applying for the roles. My older cohort are keen for the newer ones to join, but they're not particularly attuned to their needs. What would your recommendations be in those sorts of situations?
Yeah, great question. I think there's always a good starting point of just asking, what does that individual person need? So if you have a new volunteer who has done an expression of interest, I think asking them what has been their experience with other inductions, what's worked, what hasn't. If you can
Mm-hmm.
find, or even if you have an opportunity to run a focus group, you can ask things of like, how do you like to learn? What
Mm-hmm.
sort of things would you like to learn when you're in our organization? So a key example is with international students in St John, New South Wales, is finding out, why do they want to volunteer, and often it's because they're in a country that they've never been before and they want to make some friends and
Yeah.
do something outside of learning. But they have a lot of restrictions on, how many hours they can work. They often don't have
Mhm.
access to a car. They're relying on public transport, and they want to do events that are close to them. And often they really like volunteering with other international students,
Yep.
but they understand that, there's diverse groups. So how can you find ways that's going to help them? So a key example might be, what are some silly Australian, like for me, Australian slang that they might hear when they're out at events, and what does
Hmm.
that actually mean, so that they don't feel lost or feel that they're not part of a joke or a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, just asking is sometimes the hardest question to do, but is
Yeah.
so important.
And maybe doing some kind of group sessions with those different types of volunteers, bringing them together and seeing, obviously there's so many differences, but where are they alike? And obviously their drive to
Mm.
volunteer, there's similarities there somewhere, and how can we bring that connection through? Awesome. Okay, because we're kind of running towards the end of the session, we're almost over time. Any additional questions, please feel free to email them across, and Marian and myself can come back to you. But for anyone interested in hearing a little more about Rosterfy and how we might be able to support the amazing mahi you already do, please feel free to reach out to us or set up a demo. I have both mine and Marian's contact information on the screen. As mentioned, I'll be hosting one of these webinar sessions monthly, I think the first Tuesday of every month. So please feel free to share these invites to your wider teams as well for our next one. And of course, follow Marian, myself, and Rosterfy on LinkedIn to keep up with the upcoming sort of topics that we'll be covering. And this webinar will also be made available as an on-demand link, so you can share that too. And we will share a link later for that this week. If you are based in Tamaki Makaurau, the good news is that on the 20th of March, I will be holding an in-person roundtable event with the topic being lessons learned from working with the world's leading volunteering programs and what the future holds. So I will send out a link to that for you to register your interest if you're keen, and we would love to see you there. Thank you so much, Marian, for your time today. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Mā te wā, and thank you for sharing your lunch break with us. And we hope to see you again on our next session.